Ali Madud, and welcome to today's IPN Career Transition Webinar, Public to Non-Public Sector. My name is Zohib Chador, and I'm the IPN Deputy for the Northeast. We are thrilled to have all of you join us today in the hopes of helping you explore career transition, skill adaptability, and the power professional communities. As a quick sort of introduction on IPN, IPN is the Somali Professionals Network and is focused on connecting Somali professionals with each other, assisting with career and professional development, providing resources for skills development, and sharing thought leadership like this session today. Furthermore, IPN offers a number of programs and services to the community that allow us to build on top of what we learned today, such as job placement support services, as well as entrepreneurship coaching. And we also have a LinkedIn community of entrepreneurs and professionals. Real quick, I wanted to quickly introduce our four amazing IPN coordinators based in DC, a couple of them who are on the call today and helped organize this webinar. Amar Inayat Ali, Shayan Charania, Afrin Varani, and Anjia Arslan. Please feel free to leverage them as resources if you are in the DC area. If you have any questions or feedback about IPN or the services provided by the Aga Khan Economic Planning Board, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can follow our Instagram page at IPN Northeast to stay updated on future events. Lastly, if you have any questions or comments during the webinar, please do use the Q&A box. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of the session. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you all after the session. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator for today's session, Nafisa Jawani. Nafisa is the Associate Vice President and the Head of Global Health Initiatives at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, where she leads innovative health transactions and capital mobilization initiatives in emerging markets. She previously held senior leadership roles at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Nafisa, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's exciting to be here today. One, because I'm a civil servant, but two, because I get to speak to two others and learn from them as well. I'm going to start off with having our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll go through an agenda of hopefully what you'll get from the panel on understanding of what that transition will look like. And if there's questions that you have, please feel free to enter them into the chat box. You can either enter them in with your own name or anonymously as well, but we're hoping this is a fruitful conversation, and the best way for us to really make sure that we're getting to what you want to know is through dialogue. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and have Kareem introduce himself first, and then we'll go on to Farouk.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Nafisa. It's such a pleasure to be on today. And more importantly, thank you all for joining on a Sunday afternoon. I know things are busy and y'all are thinking about your career transitions, and just that in and of itself is such a remarkable feat. By way of introduction, I'm Kareem. I currently serve as a Senior Director for Strategic Solutions at C3 AI, which is a publicly traded enterprise AI company where I focus on state and local government solutions and leveraging and allowing us the opportunity to have a digital transformation that is safe, that is secure. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at the George Washington University, where I teach a class on cities and states and national security. And in a previous life, like many of you, I was in public service from the lens of being in the federal government. Most recently served as a director of intergovernmental affairs, working with state, local government, tribal government, and U.S. territories at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon, thinking about how our national security is interconnected to the work that's happening domestically. And prior to that was in philanthropy at the Asian American Foundation. I've worked my way in the Obama White House, thinking about state and local government there and presidential transitions. I've worked on campaigns and have spent a lot of time really thinking about how do we connect our community to resources in public service. And at the end of the day, I think this is really an opportunity to hit pause on where we are right now, but also an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to embrace the uncertainty that's taking place and recognize that public service is shifting, but the values that we hold dear certainly are not. And this is our moment to recalibrate and an opportunity to also reskill in thinking through where we want to go, not just in the very next step, but the 3, 4, 5 steps that might come after that in this professional journey. So I'm really glad that IPN has brought us together and excited to share a bit more from my own personal experience.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks for sharing. And I'm interested to learn more about even just from the lens of state and local opportunities as well. Farouk, I know you're outside. Thank you so much. I know you've got a meeting coming up in just a little bit, but thank you for joining us as well. You're also coming from DoD, and you've got this tremendous experience in this past role of working with small businesses, and so with the private sector and public sector. But can you give us a little bit of your background as well before we get started? And then I'm going to ask both of you a few questions, and we'll do a little bit of back and forth in that way.
Great, thank you, Nafisa. And thank you all for joining and to IPN for doing this. Sorry if there's any background noise. I had to come do this meeting from outside. But yeah, I'm Farouk Meets. I'm currently the president and CEO of a small business that I started called MVU Group that is consulting and helps industry navigate how to get involved in federal government contracting, specifically at DoD, Jack D. Gordon School of Public Policy. I just literally came out of 14 years at the Pentagon in different capacities. Most recently, I was the small business director in the Biden administration, where I was essentially responsible for all small business policy programs and engagement, pretty much an industry-facing role at DoD for the last 4 years. But before that, I was a consultant at the Pentagon under the first Trump administration as a contractor, and I also was a political appointee in the Obama administration. So I've got a lot of experience at DoD on the industry side. So I'm really interested or excited to share some of my perspectives on what that could look like in terms of private sector opportunities for people in government right now.
Great, thank you, Farouk. And it's cutting out just a little bit, so I'll let you know if we can't hear you. So for today, there are about 4 or 5 different topics I want to touch on, but we're not going to get to every single question. So I'm just going to ask a few questions in each of the different buckets. The first is really for both of you because you have, transitioned in and out of the federal government, either because you've been in a political position or a civil servant, and then you've gone into the private sector, or you've been a contractor. And so I'd love to touch on that. 2, there's a series of questions that people have had just around skill building and career development, and I think both of you have had different roles within the government and outside the government. So we'd love to hear a little bit about how you've just developed your own sort of skill set, both your hard skills and soft skills. The third bucket is getting a sense of like how do you sort of shift the way that you're thinking about that transition, because it's rough getting back out there, and how should I be thinking about the number of rejections I may or may not get if I'm applying for a role, especially because there's a saturated market. Lots of people are looking for jobs, and so just kind of getting your perspective on that. And maybe the last sort of bucket of questions that we might get to is really figuring out where there may be remote or emerging opportunities that we may not have thought about before, but that you might be able to share with us as you're sort of navigating this too. So with the first, Farouk, if you're okay, I'm going to start off with you. You've transitioned now in and out of the public sector. A lot of folks do that quite often. So I wanted to get your perspective in terms of coming in and out of the public to the private sector. What would you say is one of your top sort of line best advice to someone who's someone who's been in the, you've been at DoD for 14 years. If you're transitioning out of a government position, maybe at HHS, I think there's lots of folks who were, I believe, at CDC, or they were an epidemiologist. That's all that they've known. And now you're out of that role. What would be your sort of suggestion as you're trying to transition into the private sector?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I really learned when I was doing my most recent job, because I went and I was talking to a lot of businesses all the time, all across the country, about how to do business with DoD, how our process works, how the building works, what are the different programs, opportunities, how does policy impact industry, things like that. And to me, I was there so long that it became like second nature to me. So I would go and talk to a lot of people, and to me, it was like second nature. And a lot of these things that I was working on a day-to-day basis seemed like common sense. But I think it's important not to undervalue what we've learned inside government and the applicability of that on the outside, no matter what you do. Because the reality is, no matter how many cuts there are or what the current climate is today, it's not going to be permanent. There's always, the US federal government is the largest buyer of goods and services in the world. So even if you cut that by 5%, it's probably still the largest buyer of goods and services in the world. And that means there's always this industrial base of companies, research institutions, academia that are constantly needing to engage with the government. And a lot of times now, especially right now, there's an interest of how do we bring in more new players, and it crosses political party of companies or entities that have never worked with us before, but we need their capabilities. Entities like that are really at a disadvantage of not understanding government, not understanding the process, not understanding a lot of things that to people like us become second nature. And there will continue to be a demand for that. And there's emerging sectors that any administration in terms of manufacturing, innovation, technology, would want would want those capabilities. But those companies need people that have policy expertise, that are scientists, that have worked in government. So I think the number one thing is to value yourself and to not underestimate what you've learned over your years in government and how that could actually be beneficial to an outside entity of many.
Great, thanks, Farouk. I'm going to ask you, Kareem, what would you say are some tools that you've been able to use to translate your skills from the public sector to the private sector? And I know one of the conversations that you and I were having is really, what does it mean to be a generalist versus a specialist? And so if you can touch on that as well, that'd be great.
Sure, happy to. Let me just quickly chime in on something that Farouk said.
Sure.
It's important for us as those who've been in public service to not underestimate our value, because when we do that, it comes at our own peril. And I couldn't agree more with what Farouk is saying on that front. The other thing that I'll say is, look, transitions are risky by virtue of you engaging in a transition, right? So the price of the transition is growth. So the question is, how much are we putting in to think about that growth? So the way I've approached some of these ideas of, okay, how do you reskill? How do you kind of reimagine where you want to be is I see my career as a bit of a storyboard. And there's chapters that we're writing every time. So every time we're in a role, we're in a specific chapter of that book. And this book has X amount of chapters that we're getting at, and we're trying to connect the narrative over and over again. So as you go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3, to part 2, part 3, etc., you're trying to connect those dots together. And there might be an opportunity in which you're working, say, at the Department of Health and Human Services, and you're actually focused on disease prevention, and you're seeing that from a specific lens. So the way I've kind of broken this up in my head is, okay, in a certain chapter, I may have been working on roles that were deeply project-oriented, right? In that first chapter, I was trying to drive things to completion. Yes, my job was intergovernmental affairs, but it was actually focused on implementation affairs, right? Policy had already passed, and I had to project manage through the end. So think about, what does project management look like as you go into a new role? The other thing that I think a lot of folks think about when they're in government is program management, right? You all have had access to a variety of different budgets of varying sizes, and your job has largely been to kind of think about, how do I exist within an appropriated budget? And then how do I make sure that I'm building the right projects around that? So you probably have skills around working with the interagency, working on what a private sector company will call a cross-functional team, right? You're already doing that, but you're calling it interagency coordination. Or you're working in a department as large as the Department of Defense, as large as the Department of Treasury, Department of State, USAID, whatever organization it may be, you've built those internal and external facing skill sets. And it's important to think about that from that lens. And the last thing that I'll kind of add here is there's a bit of translation that needs to happen. So as you're storyboarding through, you have to think about, okay, who is the audience that I'm writing for? Who is the audience that's going to be reading this next book or this next chapter of the manuscript that I've started? And for me, something as simple as I analyze policy impacts and translating that to I analyze market trends is basically saying the same thing, but to two different audiences. In knowing when to translate which part of your story, and which segments of your story to which audiences, I think can be incredibly helpful in saying, yes, I may have worked on state and local affairs, but I have a background in government relations, or I've worked in small business coordination, but I have a background in market expansion, right? So being able to change some of the jargon to ensure that the people that you're talking to are understanding where you're coming from and the value that you add to their organizations.
Great, thanks. And maybe I will double click on this idea that there is an opportunity for you to translate a lot of your skills and change the wording to match what the private sector, wording would be for a certain role. And some of what's been interesting, I think, is being able to help people start to look at positions that are interesting to them, like if you're reading a role, and then being able to look through your LinkedIn network to see who do you already know that might have that role that you can speak to and say, this is what I was doing in government. How does that translate? And having them sometimes help you because you sometimes don't even realize the value that you have that you're going to bring to a role. The second, just I think both for you and Farouk, you guys were mentioning just how much your value add is, either because you've got government expertise, maybe you have security clearance that will sometimes play a role, right? So Farouk and Kareem, can you talk a little bit about like what what is appealing to like a pharma company? I think Farouk, you've worked with industrial based companies, so you've got, they've got a certain interest in having a security clearance, or if you're working with a lobbyist, like what would be of interest if you've got certain sort of skills within the government for policy or maybe security clearance or understanding how government contracts work, that might just be helpful for those that are on the phone that might have that experience.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you touched on the security clearance piece. And again, that's something that even I kind of brushed off sometimes, but it's really valuable in the private sector. I mean, when companies are required to have personnel with security clearances, a lot of times they can't find those people, and they can actually charge more to the government when they have those people. So it helps their bottom line as well. I would say also right now, when you think about innovation, when you think about advanced manufacturing and sectors, if you kind of look at the tea leaves of where the country has been headed, not just in the last couple of administrations, probably starting at the Obama administration, it's been how do we have a national industrial policy for this country? And what does that mean in terms of what industries we need here? How do we create new industries? What are those industries? I'll give you an example. The Department of Defense puts out its top 13 technology priority areas. It's from AI to robotics to cyber, autonomy, et cetera. And they basically say that we're going to start making investments in these areas. So the government, in many cases, is telling you or us where the money is going. So one thing that people should be thinking about is looking at that and then figuring out, okay, now that I know where the money is going, how do I go find opportunities there? And that doesn't mean you have to be a technology expert. I'm not a technology expert, but I can promise you there are probably startups out there who would come to somebody like myself or Kareem or many of you and say, hey, like I actually need to figure out how do I work the hill? How do I talk to the right offices within any given agency? So I think part of it is seeing where the federal government resources are going, looking for opportunities there, but don't feel like you have to be an expert in that sector because there's a lot of soft skills and inter related skills that you've learned in government that can be really applicable from a lot of different perspectives in the private sector. I hope that helps.
Kareem, anything else to add on this sort of like it's private sector, yet kind of government adjacent? So because I'm gonna sort of switch and ask and push both of you to sort of pivot to more just like completely a different role in the private sector. But do you have anything else to add on the adjacent sort of leveraging your public sector to private sector, but still kind of connected to your public sector role?
This point of understanding where the federal government is heading is something that we take for granted when we're in government. And then I think when you're on the outside, you're really trying to figure out, okay, where is Department X moving? Where is the Department of Commerce going? Where is USTR thinking about tariff and trade policy, right? So I would kind of see this as like one of your strongest skill sets that you have, knowing that we're in a moment of transition in this country, is actually the ability to navigate ambiguity, of having the skill of versatility, of actually being adaptable. And what I mean by that is you can take a national defense strategy, a national health strategy, a national commerce strategy, national industrial strategy, and say, okay, this is how I fit into this. You're able to become a leader who is both tactical and operational while also being strategic and forward-leaning. And those sorts of skills are desperately needed in the private sector of how do you manage towards key performance indicators or KPIs? What is your return on investment? How are you thinking about your business development skills in addition to your policy skills? And I'm certain as I was looking through folks who had registered for this conversation is there's a lot of talent on this call. There's a tremendous amount of rich subject matter expertise that's on this call. So you all have either worked through a variety of different presidential administrations or a variety of different cabinet secretaries who have had to lead a variety of different challenges, right? Whether it's COVID, whether it's monkeypox, whatever those challenges may have been, and you all have kind of seen through different moments. So to build on kind of Farouk's point of there's a shift happening in this country. Are you ready to use your skills in government of navigating ambiguity through that sense of, okay, I can actually be super, super versatile, or I know how to be strategic in these moments, or I know what's coming down the pike, or I know, okay, this is what the Hill's thinking about as they're beginning to appropriate a budget. And I can share some of those resources as I go out into a new role and present my value add to a new organization to say, I can use my relationships, my policy know-how, and ultimately the community that I've surrounded myself with, i.e. my network, to provide a sense of direction and a sense of purpose to the work that already may be going on in a particular industry and help them project what their industry trends and analysis looks like, not just for the next calendar year, but for the next 3 to 5 years.
And so it seems like, at least for folks who are senior in, like, let's say I've been at an agency or working on development for the last, 2 decades, seems like there's still a massive opportunity to leverage my depth of expertise, my depth of understanding of the way the government works to maybe find a role with the private sector that is leveraging that government experience. Now, if I'm someone who has this experience, but I'm looking to completely switch and do something in the private sector, how do I do that? Is that like an easy switch? Is it really super difficult? Do you recommend doing that? What are your thoughts?
So I think given kind of the moment we're in, we have to be very cautious and deeply, deeply pragmatic, right? Is there a role that I could fit into for the next 6, 9, 12 months and then pivot from there? So I think adjacency is really important. I think Nafisa touched on this. So finding your adjacent role and then making that pivot. The other thing that I often think about is how do we learn to learn again? And that's a really tough question of how do you become curious about new industries? So if you unfortunately have been riffed at this moment, or you're going through a period of uncertainty of what's going on in your office, like I would highly recommend you go to a conference or a webinar or some sort of university gathering. And when folks are talking about emerging trends in your field, and begin to think about this question that I always go back to is like, what inventions do we need now that we don't have? That could be a policy invention. It could be a business invention. You can put this into Chat GPT. You could put this into Meta AI or cloud or whatever it may be, and it'll help you envision, okay, what is that thing that the market's going to need, that the specific industry is going to need, for us to really postulate where we want to go. And for that reinvention requires work. That reinvention requires a tremendous amount of thinking and learning. Like I spent a lot of time as I was leaving DoD and moving into AI to just start reading about AI, to read books that colleagues had recommended. You've always had kind of mentors in your circle, or you've had kind of your concentric circles of people you've reached out to. I started expanding that circle of people. I was like, okay, who are the people in business operations? Who are the people in strategy? Who are the people in marketing, right? Like how are different folks in my circle thinking about this so they can expand the types of questions that I'm asking, but more importantly, help me get curious about new skill sets and new priorities, in better match the moment that we're in, rather than try to build a resume or try to talk to a world that is, or a world order that's changing and shifting beneath our feet right now.
Great. And Farouk, pivoting to you, what are your suggestions in terms of skill building and career development, and maybe also because you're also in a different role where you're leading your own company. You've also worked with small businesses as well, which is a different perspective. Any ideas there if I want to maybe do independent consulting versus like going to a larger company?
Yeah, I mean, independent consulting is definitely riskier. And I think from that perspective, relationships are really, really important. And even if you're going into any other sector, a larger company, I think that everything Kareem said is spot on. I actually don't think I could have said it better, honestly. But I think the one thing that I'll just foot stomp on is the idea of finding mentors, finding the right people that can kind of help and guide you. I think our community has a great wealth of people that can help with that stuff. But the network is really important, especially if you're in the DC area. There's so many events happening all the time, conferences. There's constant organic ways that you can kind of get more knowledge, upskill, build new relationships. And I think that part of this can't be discounted.
Great. I'm gonna pause and see if anyone from the IPN team wants to add anything just on the skill building piece as well, because I know that there have been several webinars and sessions as well targeted to all different segments of the Jamaat. Wanted to see if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, we have several resources as part of the IPN and the Icon Economic Planning Board. Feel free to reach out to us at connect@ipnonline.net, as we do have, several other webinars coming up. For example, we have a webinar today at 5 p.m. on state of the market, economic update. We help with resume building, we help with job searches. So definitely please reach out on that front.
Great. I'm gonna move on. I know Farouk, you've got just a little bit of time, so I'm cognizant of that, and I want to make sure I have a little bit of time so folks can ask you questions directly. So folks have now either, some people here are thinking about leaving, or maybe they've been riffed. And so it's a little bit different, I think, for some people if you've been laid off versus sort of the situation that we're in right now. How do you, change your mindset and think about this a little bit differently? What are some of your suggestions? And maybe I'll start off with Kareem, only because you and I have had this conversation before, and I think you've got like because you've had to do this a couple of times as political appointees go in and out of government. You're always having to find something new within a couple of years, and that's, I think, a hard thing to do, regardless of what role you're in, because you're never sort of secure. And so what are the things that you've learned in that way? Because I think that's helpful perspective, right? Like in that, every couple of years you're having to look for something new and you're reinventing yourself. And so I'd love to hear from you in terms of that perspective.
So President Obama had a saying on his Resolute desk when he was in the Oval Office, right when the Affordable Care Act was being passed, and he had received it from one of his senior advisors, and it said, "Hard things are hard." And it's an important reminder that the President of the United States had on his desk to say hard things are hard. And career transitions are hard, right? And it requires a degree of agility and resilience every single time. But these relationships and the network that Farouk kind of alluded to, it requires a deep sense of nurture, right? You have to keep folks updated on what you're doing. You have to reach out to folks when times are good, and then you can reach out to them when times are bad, right? So I think as I've gone through this process many a time now, as is Farouk, is I've probably had 80, 90, 100 different conversations with folks over the course of a 3 to 6 month time horizon to think about what is my next step going to look like. And I've done that from the political lens. My brother is in the career service. My brother works for the IRS. And he is a career civil servant and also is now having to have these conversations. He transitioned from consulting, went into the IRS, he's a certified public accountant, and has kind of thought about what this means from a public sector side. So as you all have been in these roles, it's important to keep folks apprised of, hey, over the last few years, these are the types of things I've been doing. These are the things that I've realized that are occurring in our field or in our industry. And these are the types of questions that I'm trying to answer. And I think leading through questions is much more important than leading by title. It's not like I want to become director X. I want to become vice president of Y. and rather saying, I think I've developed a skill in strategic thinking. I know how to navigate the bureaucracy. I understand the communications challenges that are being faced. And ultimately, I'm trying to work on an issue set or a problem set that's going to connect with America in the next 10 to 15 years. Do you have something in mind that I could think about? And I've posed it as an open-ended question, but I've done a tremendous amount of research as I've gone into that conversation to say, hey, I think these are the types of things that you're looking at. Or I saw a press release that came out from your organization, or I was reading in Bloomberg News that your industry is thinking about doing the following things in the next 6 months. Or I was at a conference and I heard this big launch or announcement or initiative that's taking place. Do you have more information on it? So it's always grounded in something deeply practical, but it's visionary enough to allow people to give you a sense of direction and how to mold you into where you want to go. And the last thing that I'll add is sometimes it's important to reach out to people knowing that they might not have a job for you, but that they could keep you in mind. And they'll remember, it's like, oh, Kareem reached out to me 6 months ago at the start of the year, and now we finally have that opening. I should probably follow up with them, or he might even want to follow up with me now because I said reach out to me in 3 to 6 months. And knowing what that time horizon looks like is a good indicator of what good follow up also means in this practice of keeping those relationships warm, but importantly, guiding yourselves to know when it's important to think about those milestones and reaching out to people.
And Kareem, it also seems like when you're talking about nurturing a relationship, and I know we only because we aside from having a professional relationship, we have a warm relationship regardless. But it seems like that's something that you do anyway. That it's not just focused on getting a job. And I say that because even though I'm a civil servant, I'm always assuming that tomorrow I may not be in this role, and what do I want to do next, and not getting too comfortable, because I think that's just really important for us to do. And so would that be something that you would also recommend? Because I think that's partly why people feel very open to say, oh, Kareem, you're coming back, but we already have this really great relationship. You didn't just call me when you needed something.
Exactly. Keep your relationships warm, but also keep your network informed about what's going on. Use LinkedIn to your benefit, but maybe reach out to a mentor or two over the course of the next month and say, hey, I just wanted to fill you in. These are the things that I've been working on, or these are the types of questions that I'm thinking about. I know you've gone through this transition yourself. Talk me through your transition rather than helping me with mine.
Okay. Farouk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, one thing that I'll add is I think it's really important to understand what the drivers of other sectors are. You know, what drives government and the mission of government is very different than a private company, whether it's a contractor or a commercial company or academia or a research organization, et cetera. So I think when Kareem mentioned before, you can kind of untangle correlate the jargon of what something in government could apply to something outside of government. I think on top of that, think about how whatever that skill set is can drive and support the bottom line and driver of whatever is the mission of that other organization. So I think that thinking has to shift a little bit, and I think that's another important part of this as you have conversations, or even when you're in a job interview or something like that, or talking to a potential client. Like when I talk to my clients, they want to know, how are you going to help me grow? How are you going to help me build the right relationships, right? So I need to know from my business perspective, like what I have learned, how can it drive them so I can pick up the client? It's kind of the same thing, even if you're interviewing for a job or doing the networking thing.
Great. And Farouk, you're just while I have you, you talked about this a little bit, but where are you seeing other emerging opportunities? You've talked a little bit about thinking about where the government is going. Where do you see trends? Where do you see trends right now? If you were to say, here are the top 3 areas where if I was looking for a private sector role coming out of the public sector, these are the types of things that I would be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to answer this from a very skewed perspective because of what I spend all my
Sure,
time doing,
sure.
but I do think it's applicable because at the end of the day, advanced manufacturing, innovation, and R&D in specific sectors that are the government, like I said, has said here are what our needs are. But there's a reason why DoD, for example, has said that, because that's where the commercial driver is of where growth is, where technology is coming from. You know, 20 years ago, or maybe not 20, like 30 or 40 years ago, the government was the driver of innovation. And now the private sector is the driver of innovation. And that's why the government is now saying that we need those things. we need what's happening out on the outside, right? So I think those areas are areas of continued growth and opportunity. And it's obvious, right? Like the AI, this and that, but there's a lot of commercial and business applications to those things. And I think as we think about retooling, reskilling, and figuring out where we could add value, I think looking at what the private sector opportunities are leveraging some of these new technologies and buzzwords we hear all the time is a really effective.
Yeah. Kareem, your thoughts?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about AI. I think it's going to redefine our decade. It's going to redefine our generation. What's really important is artificial intelligence can never become artificial wisdom. And what communities and what people provide is a deep sense of wisdom and a subject matter know-how of a specific industry. So you all are most capable to get into these industries. It's that AI will not replace individuals. AI will replace individuals who do not know how to use AI. And I think that's a really, really important takeaway from not just this conversation, but how we think about the future of work. AI can be an enabler. It can be an accelerant. It can never be a replacer. So think about how AI can help you additionally reskill and upskill. So that's part one. Part two is thinking about outside of the federal government, where do these jobs exist? In a lot of responsibility is either being abdicated or given to state governments, local governments, and municipal governments. And yes, there's a deep interest in working at the federal and the national level, but where our country really needs our help right now is across the 50 states and the territories, and it's in our communities, it's in county government. If you've been working in public health, one of the largest functions for county government is around public health response, and we learned this after COVID. If you've been working in financial recovery and financial management, many of our cities are going through a financial overhaul. So it's important for them to think about how do they bring in revenue? How do they project revenue? How do they think about economic development differently? How do you think about tech and innovation and advanced manufacturing differently? Education, the various public and private institutions that surround us. The work that's happening in philanthropy is now going to actually do the work that the federal government used to do in part, right? So think about the expansive universe of where those roles might lie. And then the last piece is, while there's an opportunity to do this work continentally within the United States, it's also important for us to think about those international roles. Who are the international actors who are standing up at a bilateral level, at a multilateral level, to think about how they're building their subsectors, whether it's in the Gulf, might be the Emirates, whether it's in Europe, it might be in London or in Paris or Berlin, and Canada, right? Think about how do we expand our universe of where those job opportunities might be. Those might be remote opportunities, they might be contract opportunities, or they might be full-time opportunities. And there's really a moment for us to think about, yes, there's a reinvention at play. Yes, there's uncertainty at play, but we shouldn't discredit the role that a emerging world is creating. And part of that emergence is leading to new innovation and new possibility. And it's incumbent on us to figure out where those trends are going and how we want to play a role in shaping and shifting some of those trend lines.
Thanks, Kareem. That's really helpful. Maybe on two things for in response to Farouk, I think that one at DFC, even though we finance projects in emerging markets, we're also very much seeing opportunities in the U.S. We have this DPA authority to do financing in the US for critical minerals, but even as I'm looking at manufacturing and supply chain opportunities in emerging markets, we look at redundancies here in the US. And so if if you're coming from HHS, and so it's thinking about where is it that you could maybe either work with a country that is aligned with the US, maybe it's India, and helping them understand how to better work with the US government, because that's always an opportunity. Or working with a manufacturer that's here and helping them understand, either from your perspective, if you're an epidemiologist, if you've got background in public health, if you understand how HHS works, even if you had relationships with BARDA, those types of things are very helpful. And you don't realize it because you don't realize the depth and so, almost like the gems of expertise that you have that people are looking for. And so I think again, like those are the opportunities that exist even here in the US that you're maybe not thinking are critical. I'm going to pause and see if we've got any questions from the audience for Farouk before he has to go, because I think you've got 7 minutes and I want to be on time.
We haven't received any questions yet. If any attendees have any questions, just be sure to put them in the Q&A chat on the bottom of the screen.
For Farouk. In the meanwhile, as we're hopefully going to get more questions, Farouk, I'm going to push you a little bit since you're about to leave us in 7 minutes or 6 minutes. What would your parting words be for the folks that are on this call?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that it's definitely challenging times right now, and I always have a saying that from chaos comes opportunity, and I think that this is a good time to recalibrate and to figure out what the next 10 years looks like for all of us. And I think you got to be patient, you got to be persistent, and you got to be aggressive. And I think for people who do some of the things that Kareem said specifically, especially, I think that there'll be. Can you hear me? I think my headset died.
You're great. This is perfect.
Hold on a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can. Okay, I can't hear you. There we go. Okay, there we go. I think there will be opportunity. I know it doesn't feel like that today, but there will be opportunities. And look, there is a lot of federal funding, just as an example, that was passed in some bills over the last few years, like the CHIPS Act and the infrastructure bill and things like that. Just as an example, a lot of that money is not flowing today because the current administration is recalibrating and seeing where they want to put it. But the bottom line is that it's gotta be spent. It's gonna be just one example of many of just my point that there will be opportunities, and just be aggressive. I'm a resource. You can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to share my email, and I'm happy to in any way that I can.
Thanks, Farouk. We do have one question for you before you head off. Do you have any advice for someone that's coming out of the public safety sector, if they were working for maybe the police or the FBI, or maybe they were previously the CIA, and if they're transitioning to the private sector? I think that's for you, Farouk. You're on mute.
Oh, can you repeat that? I lost you.
Oh, sure, no problem. Any advice for someone who's coming out of the public safety sector? So if they were with the police or the FBI, or maybe with another agency like the CIA, and they're going to go to the private sector, any suggestions?
I mean, there's a wide range of options there, but one is the private sector in terms of government contractors. If you're coming out of federal law enforcement, there's a lot of opportunities there, especially if you have a clearance, a top secret level clearance. But also local law enforcement. There's a lot of needs, to Kareem's point, at the state and local levels. And there's, I think it probably would require a lot of digging, but I think there is a lot of opportunity. I have a friend of mine in Orlando who has a company that focuses on selling products to local law enforcement, and he does very well doing that. I think companies that are out there like that would have a need for somebody who has expertise in some of those areas as well, just as an example.
Kareem, any response to that question?
Yeah, I fully agree with Farouk. If you have a background in law enforcement, I think the tone of this country is certainly allowing you to kind of think about that. I would be very mindful of some of the public safety considerations that go along with it. Let me just offer a few very concrete places where you all can be looking. One of them is called Work for America. So if you have been impacted by a reduction in force, or if you've been impacted by a federal layoff or a federal buyout plan, whatever it may be, Work for America is a nonprofit organization that was stood up in the last 7 or 8 months to really help people who are transitioning from the federal sector and move into state and local government. So I think that's a really good point. Another one is called Former Gov. Former Gov is an organization that was stood up to help people find contract roles and to find expert consultancies as they're getting on their feet again. The third one is a newsletter that's run on philanthropy that Narain Khan runs, who used to be at the Ford Foundation. I would look up some of the work that she's doing, and she's constantly posting resources. And then the last one is we actually have quite a few Smileys who are working in strategic consultancy, particularly at McKinsey. And they've made themselves available to do resume reviews and also to provide referrals into that organization in particular. So when it comes to whether it's law enforcement, public safety, economic development, whatever it may be, some of these larger strategic consultancies are not just working with federal clients, they're also working with state and local clients. And it's worth looking into how they might be able to be a resource to you.
Thanks, Kareem. All right, Farouk, I know that you've got to jet for a meeting. I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of the IPN team and the folks who are on the call. I know that you are incredibly busy, but we really do appreciate you being here and for your offer and being able to provide additional support afterwards. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thank you all for making the time to join.
Bye, Farouk. Good luck. Okay, Kareem, I still have you for a little bit of time. I know you've got a couple of other resources and ideas. I'm going to see if there are any other questions that are coming in through the chat. And if not, then I'm going to push because I know Kareem. I'm going to ask Kareem, how many no's before I get a yes? So if I'm getting no's right now and I'm just starting the job search, what should I be expecting?
Yeah, so going back to kind of where we were earlier of in order to land a job, it's probably going to take 80 to 90 different conversations, at least kind of that's what I had to go through. And I'd say about halfway through your process, you'll begin to realize, okay, these are the types of roles that are available, or these are the types of opportunities that are available, right? So that process might look different. When I say 80 to 90 conversations, I mean like casual conversations, I mean coffees, networking events, one-on-one discussions, informational interviews, networking calls, kind of like that whole gamut of energy that's necessary to actually get that done. But I wouldn't be dissuaded by the no's. The no's are actually an opportunity to tell you, okay, this is how you can refine. This is like the slight adjustment that you need. I mean, if I could give you all like very, very practical advice is always do a follow-up thank you email and always make sure that you're being responsive, saying please, thank you, and sorry when something happens. And that really, really helps because those thank you emails stay with you in your inbox. And your last email to that last person isn't like, hey, can you help me? It's like, hey, thanks so much for helping me. And that strikes very, very differently. So it's okay to get no's. I actually had a ledger, I had a spreadsheet that I kept of, okay, these are the organizations that I've said no. But that means I've gotten a no for that one specific role. That doesn't mean that the entire organization has said no to me, right? And these are multinational, multi-client organizations. They might not have the perfect opening. You might be looking for a director role, but you might have to start at a manager role. Or you're looking for a manager role, you might have to start at a senior associate role. It's okay to go into a role and then build from there. Part of it is getting your foot in the door. And once you do get your foot in the door, I'm confident that these organizations and companies and employers will see your value, will see your worth, and say, okay, I know Nafisa, she's phenomenal. She's worked with all these people. She can take on more responsibility. Or I know Farouk, he's awesome. And we can actually give him an entire additional portfolio because he's done this in the past at DoD. So I would try to get in rather than getting yourself out of the running for something even before you get another opportunity.
Okay. I'm going to ask some of the IPN folks if they can also chime in on the second one. As much as I love Kareem and I know that he's got an answer to everything, but that way he has an opportunity to drink some water too. Does anyone on the IPN team have any ideas on potential AI business opportunities if they're going from the public sector to the private sector?
Yeah, I would just say, we do have various sort of panels related to the AI and technology. We're doing one, at least in Manhattan, later this next month on AI and education. You can connect with us, and we're happy to, connect you with experts in this field. We do have a LinkedIn community of professionals and entrepreneurs, and we also help with resume building as well. So we're definitely always open and happy to connect with folks in various sectors and fields.
And Zoeb and Kareem, I mean, like at least for me, like I think that the way in which I might look at a resume differently is if there's a referral, and there's formal referrals that can happen, and there's informal referrals that can happen, and I'm sure that all of us have sort of seen those. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in terms of either being on the job hunt and knowing what made a difference in terms of you getting the role versus not getting the role? I definitely think that for those positions that I've seen, I've had a couple of friends apply for because I have several folks, unfortunately, who lost their job that were at HHS that were in very senior positions, all clamoring for very senior roles, but they're not applying the way that you would normally apply. They're going through their network. And that's going to make a massive difference in terms of whether or not they're going to get a position. I'm just curious to hear from you. What was sort of like the differentiating factor between getting a role, not getting a role, getting a referral, a formal referral, not getting a formal referral?
Sure, I can go, and so feel free to chime in if you have an additional perspective. I actually got my current role through a referral, actually through an Ismaili who works at the company that I'm at, right? So this just goes to show you the power of the internal referral connection, but it's not just getting the referral, it's kind of being coached throughout that process, right? And every company, every organization is going to have a different fielding interview. They're going to have a different interview to just like talk to the HR representative. And then once you get through the HR representative, there's going to be some sort of skills assessment that you have to go through, whether it's a written assessment or some sort of document that you have to fill out. And it's really in that period of time, it was like, okay, you've made it through the door. And then you want to kind of figure out, okay, what is the nuance that I want to add to my discussion? What is the level of granularity that I want to share that's associated with the specific field, the specific company? And then once you make it through the skills assessment, there's a series of kind of, do you know what you're talking about types of discussions, right? So making sure that you're then reaching out to folks who might be in adjacent industries or in adjacent roles in trying to get their perspective. I think that's been really, really helpful. And then the last piece, I guess, once you kind of make it through steps 5, 6, 7, 8 is salary negotiations and beginning to think about, okay, how do I best position myself for the best offer? And that's really where I think a lot of these networks can be helpful in beginning to identify, okay, this is what I've seen on Glassdoor, this is what I've seen on Indeed, this is what I've seen on LinkedIn, and making sure that the entire life cycle of that interview process, you have someone to help you. And across that life cycle of the interview process, the person who referred you might be really helpful, but you might have other people along the way who are helping you at different stages of that job interview. I think we get so fixated sometimes in thinking about, okay, I just need to make it to the interview. And if I make it to the interview, the job is mine. It's like, once you've made it to the interview, there's 10, if not 100 or a few hundred people who are also trying to make it through that first stage. So really be mindful. My current boss always says, as you're pursuing one opportunity, you really need to be pursuing 10. And there's this idea of how do you kind of risk assess and risk mitigate to make sure that, like, I'm fascinated by opportunity 1 and I want I have a 90% likelihood that if I get it, I would take it. But then you have to think about opportunity 7, 8, 9, and 10 and where you might fit into that ledger as well. So try to pursue multiple opportunities concurrently so that you're not dissatisfied by the outcome of something and that you feel, oh, I tried so hard for X role, it didn't work out for me. Now I don't have anything else lined up. So try to pursue multiple paths at the same time in hopes that one of them kind of leads you through, and then you can begin to leverage the rest of your network. Oh, you're on mute, Nafisa.
Yeah, I've got like one maybe last thing. We've got 3 minutes left. There was a question about imposter syndrome, and I thought maybe, Farouk had talked about how he's like not a tech person, he's in the tech field. I'm not a banker, but I lead the health practice at a bank, at a development bank. And I was really nervous about going into the DFC, and I had a woman actually who was younger than me, not older than me, saying to me, "Are you kidding me? You could 100% do that role. The fact that you're even questioning it is baffling."
Yeah.
But I was really worried because I'm not a banker. But she's like, "But you've had all these other experiences. It's not like you'll be fine. Like you understand banking enough. You'll be totally fine." And in my mind, I felt like I had to be an expert in every single area. And so figuring out where is it that you need to understand enough and where is it that you can create your space because you've got this expertise. And I
Sure.
think had I not had that conversation, I never would have moved forward with that position because I would have constantly felt like I'm not good enough for this position. And so being able to, I think, take stock of the expertise that you do have and not, sort of hold yourself in a position where you don't think that you can do something that's bigger than what you've done before just because you haven't done it before. And then have people around you, and I think older, younger, I think makes a massive difference too. I definitely think when I've made bigger leaps, it's by talking to people who are younger than me, to be honest. And I think it's because they're looking at me in a very different way than I'm looking at myself sometimes. And so I recommend that if you're worried about imposter syndrome, take time to talk to different networks and not the networks that you normally would talk to, because I think it gives you different perspective. Last question before we finish our, I think because we've got an hour. Kareem, any reflection on the end of Fulbright? Do you think it's going to be temporary, or do you think it'll come back?
Oh, I am never in a position to postulate about foreign policy or the decisions that the US Congress is going to make on behalf of the State Department. I think it's a great program, and I hope it continues. There's a huge opportunity to kind of think about international education, and it's not my place to comment on where the focus or the future of that program will go. But I do know that cultural understanding building is a really important facet of this work.
That's diplomacy 101, Kareem. That was beautiful.
Uh, let me just kind of end
Yeah.
by a closing thought as we're coming to an end. I just want to share two last reflections. One, regardless of whatever discipline you enter, I hope you realize and know that you have a tremendous amount of value to add to these organizations. As I was saying, as I was teaching this semester, one of the things that I quickly learned is there might be hundreds of disciplines in the world, but the greatest discipline that we're all a part of is the discipline of hope. And hope is a discipline unto itself. It requires a persistence. It requires that patience that Farouk was getting at, and that ability to keep going back and saying, the world, a more prosperous world is possible. And that's what we're working on. And that's my final point is we have a creed in the United States of we the people. And that creed is really important. But oftentimes we're limited by our own creed because there's been this element of thinking about building a government that is probable. We focus a lot on what I call probability government. If we have the next best practice, we'll keep replicating over and over again. But we're at a time in which America is about to turn 250 next year. And it's incumbent on us, particularly those who are in public service, to think differently about the world. So we don't need to build a probability government. We need to build a possibility government. And when we talk about we the people need to think about a possible future of the world that we're trying to build. And that possibility is hearkened by innovation, it's hearkened by experimentation and by entrepreneurship. And this conversation is really about thinking innovatively and reinventing ourselves to think about how do we inject hope into whatever we do, because it is a tough job market. It is not lost on me. And I know what folks are going through because I've gone through it myself, but make sure you keep that element of possibility alive, because that is what has kept this country going for the last 250 years. And if we want to help write the next 250-year journey of this country, it's going to be incumbent on us to reimagine the confines of what's going on at present and redefine it into a way that allows us to inject hope into whatever role that we take on. And I wish you all the very, very best. I know it's a tough journey, but I know if we can imagine a world that is better, it's gonna allow us to really think through what that next job step might look like at an individual level.
Kareem, thank you so much. Those were beautiful words to end with, and I can't say anything better but to end with hope. I think that's a beautiful way to end today's session. With that, thank you to both Kareem and to Farouk for your time as panelists. I'll hand it back over to the IPN team.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Nafisa. That does bring us to the end of this webinar. Wanted to thank again Kareem, Farouk, our moderator, Nafisa, for an insightful webinar and for their time today. The webinar would not have been possible, frankly, without them. Would also like to thank all of you for attending and listening today. Please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the recording link of today's session, along with some resources from IPN. IPN is here to help you connect with each other, help you in your career, professional development, and entrepreneurial endeavors. Like I mentioned before, we do have an economic update hosted by EPB later today at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. For those of you who are interested, please reach out with any questions and requests at connect@ipnonline.net. Stay safe and ya Oli Madad.